Welcome to the shit show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
My name is Joe Augustin.
I'm David Coe.
And here you have me, this time at the bottom end, Richard Busolato. Welcome.
We've changed places.
Yeah, welcome. It's a brand new show in the sense that we've evolved from the shows that we've been doing like separately, but now all together as one. And yeah, this is called The Shit Show, and we'll talk about why it's called The Shit Show. But in the meantime, before we get going, my usual thing to ask is, why don't you give this a chance? Like, subscribe, do all that kind of stuff you usually do when you like something, because just in case you like it, just keep it as it is. And if you hate it, well, you can take it away. And now we can talk about what the show might be about. Now, the Shit Show's goal is to untangle the polycrisis. You may have seen that. My wife asked me, what is a polycrisis? So I think we should start there. What is the polycrisis?
Well, so I'll start. So I've got a visual that I use regularly to demonstrate what the polycrisis is, and it's basically when you've got lots of extreme things happening all at the same time. And, while this is a lot to take on board in one look, we all know that there's multiple things going on, from geopolitics to global economics, food security and inflation, social cohesion, the lack of trust, all the way through to the planetary crisis. So a lot of people only talk about climate change, and climate change is just one pillar in the mix. Biodiversity loss. I'm going to share a pretty horrible story about that. I should take the banner off so we can actually see the things at the bottom. So it's all of these things all happening at the same time, and that's what makes it a polycrisis. So I'm happy to share this visual if people want to know more. So, and the reason we're calling it a shit show is because it is literally a shit show out there. And when we all woke up and saw the news today, I think we can all agree it's definitely a shit show. Now, I don't know about you, but my husband wasn't so keen on the name, especially out in Asia. Swearing isn't something you try and reduce your swearing. But I think one of the things that we've all seen right across the world, including in Asia, is there's a lot more foul language being used by people who probably wouldn't normally use it. But Joe, I know your wife wasn't so keen either, right?
Yeah, no, it's one of those things, as in, like, she's concerned about the signal it gives. Like, she's seen the other shows, and she said, it's kind of a good show. Why would you call it the shit show? Which is a valid point. And I thought that the dissonance of it might have at least some impact. People might go like, oh, okay, what's that? But yeah, we hope to pay off on it in the sense that people tune in and go like, okay, this is something that they buy into the idea, they agree with the concept. And as I shared on my post, I mean, the name of the show is a protest, right? Hopefully, what happens is we get to fix things, and we can change the name. Yeah. However,
ambitious. That's always I like
the eternal optimist.
Yeah. I wouldn't call Joe that.
Indicates the name will be around for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But so last week on the No Show, Tim said, are David and Richard okay with this name? And I'm like, yeah, they've fully embraced it. So what about from your perspectives?
The thing is, it's self-defined. So my wife asked me, what's the polycrisis? My kids asked me, what's the polycrisis? And I said, it's the shit show. Just have a look.
Yeah, exactly. It's an easy way of saying it.
Yeah, so it's a very direct way of saying it. And then, of course, when they say, well, what does that mean? Well, it's the polycrisis. So it kind of makes you think.
Right. Yeah, that's yeah. It's the simplest way of explaining it, right? What about you, Richard?
Well, having spent virtually all my adult life on a trading floor, my language is not the greatest in most situations of life, which you need to be very careful, particularly when children are around and young adults, etc., because you don't want them to get the wrong idea. But to be perfectly honest, in my category of swear words, shit doesn't qualify. I'm sorry, it just doesn't.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So yeah, totally fine with it. And I liked the more modest name we decided to go with, because I could have think of far worse one.
Yeah. And they're on book covers and podcasts everywhere now, those sort of words, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I think it describes perfectly well, like David says, the situation we're in. And I think it's important we kick off with the polycrisis, because it will not be an intuitive word for most people to understand. And I'm
Yep.
certainly not someone who can say all the things. But the map you showed, I think, is very good because it really highlights all the extreme pressures that are affecting people and the planet at the moment, that are pulling in very different directions and affecting us very, very differently. But none of those are for any good. And
Yeah.
going back in time, it's very, very hard to find any time frame where actually we were in such a perilous state because of the multitude of factors that are literally sucking us down.
Yeah.
For a
Yeah.
better word. So I think it's very important to start there when you're actually going to describe what the polycrisis is to most people.
And being able to link it all together, I think, is something that we really want to achieve, because, I'll see people voting in elections because of inflation or the housing crisis, and they're not sort of putting two and two together, that all of these other aspects are actually impacting those crises. And
it might be
the
helpful at
strong
this
man's-
particular point. I just realized that we're going to have some people who are on the podcast who haven't heard or seen the chart that you're talking about. So just talk about broadly about the polycrisis. It's planetary issues, geopolitics, war, technology risks, societal collapse, misinformation, disinformation, economic risks, inequality, poverty, equality, all that kind of stuff, all happening at the same time. And I think one of the things that's very interesting about this as well, people talk about the crisis that tends to move them when they're voting. People are only aware of the thing that is apparent to them, or it's most apparent to them. And what this show is trying to do is take you a bit further out and go, like, you know what, there's a bigger picture to all of this. You are experiencing all of what you're experiencing, and it's all important to you. But at the same time, there's a bigger reality to be aware of as well.
Yeah.
And I do find that, if you're a bit nerdy like me and you like digging into things, a lot of these things are actually interconnected below the surface. Yes, there are some things that come from diametrically opposite directions affecting us all, sucking us down. But when you scratch and dig a little bit deeper, you will find that a lot of these causes are actually interconnected. And then they express themselves in different ways. It's like war is effectively only the extension of a political argument. And I think that's playing out rather brutally around the world at the moment.
Yeah. So there you go. The shit show is the polycrisis. The polycrisis is the shit show. I like that, David.
I also think we should say at this point that that the point of the show is not just to point out that there are these problems or these issues to look at. We're also here to provide or at least offer up some solutions. I mean, look, in our hubris, maybe somebody who can do something might be listening. Somebody knows somebody who might be listening. So maybe some of these ideas that we're going to come up with today, or at least offer up, may go somewhere as well. So this is not only about feeling depressed about things. It's about looking at the other side and going like, okay, there's something that we can do about it. And part of it is talking about it. So this is what we're doing in this particular show. But before that, I think we're going to do something that we've done in the previous shows. Start off with things that have been getting our attention this week. So what has that been for you, Andrea?
Well, I mean, there's no other place to start, right, than what's sort of come to light today. The bromance is over, as many people are saying. And it was funny, as we were going to bed last night, and we're all excited because today my son Lex graduated from national service this morning, so it's been an exciting day for our family. But as we were going to bed, I started to see what was happening and how it was sort of escalating, and seeing people's views and opinions on it very, very quickly, of course. To me, it's just another distraction. And this is obviously Trump and Musk, right? It's just another distraction because there's other things that are going on right now in the world that are really requiring people's attention, especially in the US. But the other thing that this, Joe, I've said it from the start. In fact, David and Richard, I've said it on Climate Courage as well. There is a mission underneath the surface, and I've always said that Trump is the distraction and the goal is to get Vance up. And I saw this one tweet, which I'll share here, from, I don't know who Jonia Askler is, but He says in his tweet, in the coming days and weeks, expect more calls from Musk and other techno-fascist oligarchs for Trump's impeachment. This is part of a broader strategy as they own JD Vance and are positioning him for the presidency to complete their takeover of the United States of America. Now, some people might say, nah, come on, I think we lack imagination. There is a very clear play at hand. It's there for anyone who wants to see it. And I think that that's actually the bigger risk that we're seeing right now. So there's another piece that I saw, somebody who writes a piece, it's called The Psychological War on Democracy by Jim Stewartson. And his suggestion today was that Donald Trump should impeach JD Vance and move very, very quickly so that doesn't happen. So it's going to be interesting, no question about it. But I think JD Vance is a much worse option. Because if Trump has to impeach JD Vance, then he has to get the Democrats on side. So he's going to have to change a lot of what he's doing. So, yeah. Anyway.
I think it's interesting that, the reports I read this morning, and this is from the Times of India, interestingly, is the poll Musk has put out about whether there should be a third political party. And obviously, the intention is sort of saying, look, we're going to get there. And the interesting thing is if the big, beautiful big bill, or whatever it's called, fails to pass, is Trump going to put Musk in jail? Because his buddy Putin does things like that.
Or kick him out of the country like Steve Bannon once, right?
Yeah.
As an illegal immigrant. We've got Sami Pazzi, what a great name here from Nairobi, Kenya. Thanks for joining us, mate.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's
very complex, right? And you now kind of intermixing game theory with political reality and some pretty huge egos out there. That's not
game theory.
It's not that easy to foresee what's going to happen. I think the connection between Vance and sort of, let's call them, foreign-born techno-billionaires in the US is very clear and has been shown a number of times. How much influence the vice president can actually exert on someone like Trump, I'm not sure. We're talking about pretty huge ego here that has kind of actually revolutionized American politics, the way he hijacked and took over the Conservative Party. And there will be strong elements of the Conservative Party who will curse the day they didn't go ahead and impeach him last time around and clear the deck to a new policy. And now they're getting squeezed from a lot of angles. And they also have some pretty heavy demographic factors against them going forward into the next couple of elections. So the Conservative Republican Party in the US is not in a great place to play offense from here in terms of how they tackle these issues. Because at the end of the day, for most senators and congressmen, their overriding concern is to keep their place. And you have elections in a year and a bit. So it can become incredibly messy, for a better word, how this plays out. But round one clearly was won by Trump because we destroyed Tesla's stock market value yesterday on the back of this very public spat. However, you cannot underestimate, I think, the forces that Musk more or less represents. And I would assume they have actually more power and muscle than Trump and the extended family has at the moment. So there will be a fight back coming. And how that plays out, super interesting.
Yeah. I wonder when you were talking about demographics, right? So I always say, MAGA's like 30% of the voting public in the US. And, to get Trump the win, you got about 20% of the tech bros, the crypto people, young guys, the manosphere. So that to me is what won the election.
Yeah.
But the Democrats, and they've lost a bit of, flavor, I suppose, in the US since the election. Will they maintain that sort of close to 50%, cut? Or will they lose it? So if Musk sort of brings in another party, are they big enough? I don't know. And then you kind of the whole Palantir Teal story that's been breaking in the last week of, Americans' data is going to be put into one place, and AI, is going to know everything about every single person in the US. I think that story, which has been sitting there and milling, and in the UK, you've got Palantir in the NHS, and the government seems to be behind it. It's not just the UK; it's other countries as well. So the techno fascists, or the tech bros, or the nerd Reich. There's all sorts of names from Carol Cadwallader, the UK journalist who broke the Cambridge Analytica story. She's on a tour of the US at the moment. I don't know if you've had a chance to talk about anything. She is terrified by what's going on, and she gets it. Joe.
Yeah. I'm just watching out for the listener right now who's trying to catch up with everything that's happening, right? So the Palantir thing is basically this: they're processing all the data from very, very wide sources, and it's basically intelligence about the population, which for some countries may not be as far out or different. I mean, if you've been living in China all this time, it's been happening for you all this time anyway. I'd say in Singapore, pretty much so as well, in terms of how the government handles data and information. But I think for countries where they talked about freedom and the right to privacy and all those different things, that's a significant aspect of it. So I just wanted to bring the audience in on that particular aspect of it. And the name Peter Thiel, right?
Thiel.
I mean, it's a name we brought up before. One of the big techno players as well. He's very much, or he is behind this, and there's a lot of suspicion, obviously, right? Because it sounds like a very powerful tool, and it sounds like you shouldn't have it in the private sector.
Yeah, I think that's the key, right? No, when you talk about Singapore, like we know that our data's here, but we trust the government, right? The benevolent sort of approach. In commercial hands, it's a different story, right?
Yeah, and I think what makes it for me morally quite opaque and in this gray zone of stuff that I'm not sure I'm totally comfortable with. Well, I'm not, and I can see why people at large will not be, is when you start blending private and public data, right? There's public data which needs to be available. It's like, I come from Sweden, the equivalent Freedom Act there means I can find out most public data about people unless there are very good reasons for them not to have their addresses published, etc. If you come and you ask for the address, I need to be able to contact someone. When you take the public information and you clearly start blending it with privately obtained data about what websites do you visit, what subscriptions do you have, etc., it becomes kind of very Orwellian very, very quickly. And I think for most people, they should be really uncomfortable with that for many good reasons.
Well, people who got angry about Cambridge Analytica, right? This is to an X or 10X kind of a level, because it's more than just about your expressed opinions and what you've said before. It's now compared and can be compared to your actual behavior. So it'll pick up data like maybe how much money you make, the jobs you've had, the way you live. It's a lot more complex. It's not just about the opinions, but the background information as well. So it gives a strong foundation for somebody who is doing things like projections based on the next step. So how Amazon kind of gets an idea what you would like to buy next right now, just from the little data you give it. Imagine that 20 times bigger, as it now understands about your life, it understands about your family, it understands about where your family lives, and it's
healthcare.
It sounds terrible.
I'd like to I'd like to bring one thing up about Palantir, and it connects back up to J.D. Vance again, and it connects up to Pope Francis, and it connects up to kind of the broader aspect. He wrote a letter to his shareholders, and this is really the crux of kind of what Joe is pointing to, and Andrea in that sense. And in it, he states, and he quotes St. Augustine in this, who is a Catholic saint from the 4th century that Richard and I had mentioned before, but he essentially misquotes. St. Augustine in that way too, or misuses the meaning of that quote. And he says, all men are to be loved equally. That St. Augustine wrote. But since you cannot do good to all, you are to pay special regard to those who, by the accident of time or place or circumstance, are brought into closer connection with you. So this is the idea of saying America first. We are closest, therefore we must use everything to protect ourselves, and that's what we need to do. J.D. Vance made the same comments about the role of Christianity, and Pope Francis says you are to love all. Your love, there is no such thing in love as this one deserves it more than others. There's no such thing as you being closer, therefore loves more. And I think that's really important, because at the heart of all of this is not the power of the tools, but it is how it is used, whether it is used for the justice and equity of all, or whether it is for those you hold close and dearest to you. And when you do the latter, you have the shit show. And as an indication of that, this week, the thing that shocked me most was how yesterday, almost as if it's a show designed, the US veto of the UN Security Council resolution of ceasefire over Gaza gets completely wiped off the media by this breakdown of the bromance. Who cares about the bromance? I care about the US using the veto in that way a lot more. And I care about the Gazans a lot more than about the US issuing the veto.
Totally. And that's the thing. It's a big distraction, right? And there's so many more important things going on.
And it all goes right back down to this crux of how people take things out of their understanding and context, picks 20 words, and then say, this comes from such and such, and therefore I have authority to say, I care for those closest to me more rather than those further away, because somehow there is a distinction to be made. And I want to make a comment. On Sunday, Richard and I played our game, the game of Thrive, online for the first time with a group of people in Malaysia. And the thing about it gets into climate change. And the thing about the climate change in the game, what happens is that you don't know who is going to hit. And that's where you realize, actually, if you keep supporting the ones around you, the guys who really know what to do are way out there. They're the ones that you've just shat on. Shit show again. And those are the ones that you actually do need.
You might get a spam warning for all the branding you're doing, David. But
No, it's a good point. Steve just said, can we all just agree that JD Vance is the shit show? So I would say, not that. I think he's just a part of it. He's a big risk, but yeah, one of the things that I keep thinking about is in the global south, we're watching very wealthy people move their children to the global north to try to get them into secure positions for the future, right? Totally get that. But the people on the street, the farmers, the rickshaw drivers, the street chefs, those sort of people, they're the ones that keep societies running. They can't escape. And they're the people that are going to have the walls put up in front of them. So I think we're being very, very stupid if we're only going to take care of the wealthiest, which is, of course, the whole sort of techno-fascist sort of thing. It's about taking care of a select group of people, the whole network state sort of concept. Societies need all sorts of people to run, and climate refugees are going to come from across the board, and we need to work out how do we cope with that? How do we settle people? There's going to be new lands opened up where there's melting at the moment. Construction workers, the people who actually build our cities, our towns. So there's a lot of people who we're not going to want to take care of, but actually they're the ones that we need the most. We don't need the wealthy, privileged elite. We need the people who can get their hands dirty.
You reminded me that there are two things kind of popped up in my mind along. So back in 2004, there was this film called The Day After Tomorrow, and it's an apocalyptic film about how climate change.
It's my favorite.
the Atlantic overturning current, AMOC.
Mhm.
And as a result, the US and the northern, the global north freezes basically.
Mhm.
And the Americans have to beg the Mexicans to be let in.
Yeah.
So this is the case. They're literally there at the wall they built,
Running.
saying, "Can we
Yeah.
come through?"
Yeah, exactly. Running across the Rio Grande with their suitcases.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great, right? Yeah.
And
but
the other thing
but to me, that's why I love the movie, because first of all, it felt like the most realistic, even though it's, the scientists say that actual happening is not a possibility, because a sudden switch like that isn't a possibility. But it felt like a real possibility from we don't know where the place is that we're going to have to go. We don't. So
a couple of years ago, I was, when the news about the bomb, the ice bomb or whatever it is, bomb ship storms. There's the sudden cold things that embeds the US as it gets into the winter, really cold storms that it gets.
Yeah.
Bomb cyclones or something hit. And there was this news about an airport out in Wyoming somewhere. And the temperature dropped over 15 minutes from plus 10 degrees, I think plus 15 degrees, down to -5. And then proceeded to drop over another hour, another 10 degrees or so.
Yeah.
Now, when you say it doesn't happen, it happens. You go out there.
Not freezing fuel sort of. But that's what the scientists are saying. But yeah, like 10, 15 degrees.
No,
like
but
in Europe at the moment.
Significantly negative, and you go out there and basically, your roads and the things is the part that we get wrong about the science or the science fails to get right. Perhaps that's a better way of thinking about it. It's the way the world works. You don't need the catastrophe for it to unravel. You just need to have a bad day. Because all this call for efficiency, what it means is that nothing really works if you don't get that 100% or 110% from everything in that way. So it really doesn't take much to start unraveling it. And when it does, you then find that actually it's all connected, and that's where you have a problem. And so I think that's the part where, for Richard and I, the reason why we got into this, as it were, is because we don't want to be poor. And we kind of see the unraveling, and we kind of, and in previous times, we've been in the market for 30 plus years, right? Richard's been there despite his young age for 5 decades. That's quite incredible. And we've seen through crisis after crisis and so on around there, and we had always been able to find a way for us, either by trading it or stepping outside it or whatever it is, to manage. This one, there is nowhere to go.
Yeah, right.
This one, there is no being smart about it. The only smart thing you can do is selfishly look after others so that you can thrive.
Yeah.
And we sorry.
No, I just thought that's probably, and I think if people should really take what you've just said on board, because it was a very profound message, about there's nowhere to go, and you both know you've always known where to go, right? This is a different time, and I think that sort of just really emphasizes to me the times that we're in. So I wanted to get to our first theme for the day, and that is what is driving the economic crisis. So who wants to start first? I'm going to highlight you. Do you want to start first, David?
Yeah, I'm very happy to do that. I think this is
All right.
one thing which people don't really appreciate. Is what Richard and I recognized when we were hedge fund managers, that managed money, made money for big money. And who is big money? Big money is basically your pensions, the pensions of the people in the wealthier countries and the middle class in the fast growing kind of economies of China and India, Asia, in that way. And that's basically kind of the big money. Some of the oil money counts in there too. But they're individuals. They ultimately belong to households. And when we wrote the book, The Unsustainable Truth, we were really responding to this question of saying, why is this incessant pace for growth? And we went through and worked out how fast a 20-year-old who's contributing first to the pensions, to their first pensions, need that pension to grow at in order to be able to give enough for themselves. And that's a phenomenal amount of money. It's kind of 10+%, basically. And that's not the pace at which nature can thrive at. It may have been the case 5 decades ago, back in the 1970s, but it isn't the case now. And that's really significant to remember, because population is much smaller, a lot more places you can go at, all the low-hanging fruits of what you can do in that way are gone. And people forget that actually all the low-hanging fruits are gone. So Richard and I then went on and did another calculation and thought, well, what about all these people who are currently pensioners? Well, pensioners are really interesting, because when you and I who work generally, and we get paid out of the revenues of the businesses. So when a business kind of take money, they have to pay its employees, and that's the revenue being paid out. But pensioners don't work. So they're paid from the profits of the business. They actually have to live off the profits of the business. So when people start talking about profits over people, what's driving the profits are the people who are not working and have claims to the profits. Those are the pensioners. Those are the people I know who, in the early 60s, who now kids gone to university, found their job, and they're now traveling around the world once every three weeks, going to different places, kind of enjoying their life and doing those things. And they have a great life. And that's kind of people who very much live in Europe, North America, again, the wealthier of the Chinese, Indians, and so on. And we did this quick calculation of saying, well, how much do they live off? So in the UK, the average pension household lives off something like £38,000. So this household is 2 people, and some are single households, but I'm just assuming that actually it's more individual along, because if you're a single household, that actually increases the amount that you need because there are more people along in that way. If you're divorced, then your wife is one household and you're another, as an example of how that works along, because we don't die. That's the point. We don't die. It's really important to remember. So we got all
pretty crucial, in fact.
And when you multiply that up by the number of households who are in that sort of Europe, North America, wealthier Chinese, Indians, wealthier Asians, some Middle East, and so on, you get to a number of like $10 trillion that they need to live off. That's bigger than the economy of the UK. And it's bigger than the profits, about double the profits of the world's largest 2,000 companies, the Forbes 2000 index. The rest of them more or less add up to maybe about the same or a bit less than that, essentially. And these pensioners are supported to a basic level by part of the revenue. The taxes paid, they go and pay out the pensions. And if you look in the UK, pensions are the thing that are always, always protected. In the UK, there's a thing called the triple lock to ensure that the pensioners vote for the government. Because what do governments want, as Richard alluded to earlier? The first priority of any government is to stay in power. The first priority of any party not in government is to get in power. And so everything else falls into the shit show. And there are more elderly people looking to retirement and in retirement than they're younger in the richer countries. And they turn out to vote significantly more than the younger people. So the entire politics is driven by this need for companies to keep profits up, because the voters who vote are the ones who live off the profits and not off their earnings. So when you then go along and say, well, companies should not be making so much profit, they should spend more of their time looking after the environment and so on. Well, I'm going to die in 10 years anyway, so it's not really my problem. And I've worked hard, so I really want to be traveling around, enjoy the world before it's all gone. Now, that's a huge mindset shift that we therefore need to be aware of. And this is my, kind of my peers. And for many of us, potentially our parents who are there, my mum is 90. She actually spends almost nothing. But my siblings spend a lot and live off a lot. And, kind of like I look at them and think, wow, really? And when you look along at how that mindset is really crystallized, if you really want to move this, it's actually getting to that and start saying, okay, well, maybe read more books, have more kind of singing groups. I go singing with my mum every Saturday with this group for visually impaired singers, VIP singers. If you're in London and you know someone who's visually impaired, just get in touch. Saturday mornings, and it's a lovely group where we socialize over songs. So, but coming back to the whole problem, the underlying pressure, the underlying force for this is the fact that the boomers are now getting to retire. The Gen Xers are following them, and they don't know how to shift their mindset.
And David, I think it's important to highlight the other point you often make, which is humans are the only species that retire.
Yes.
I think that's important too, right?
Humans are the only species that retires. And the problem with it, Richard came along and educated me about a long time back, about the Modigliani life cycle, where you start off basically at the bottom without much resources that you need. You sort of, as you get older, you build it up, and then you start eating into it and you go down. Well, on a planetary level, what that has done is that you start off essentially people not needing a lot. You start building up, and then as you get older, you start using more. So if you think about our elderly today, including myself, we need more. We hang on to more, and we need more in addition. We need more healthcare. We need more social care. We need more a friendly environment for us, and we need more entertainment and leisure that we want to do. We want to catch up on all the hard work we've done, taking the world to this place, and now we want to enjoy the fact that we have worked so hard. And so we end up needing more. So that life cycle curve is completely corrupted. Instead of coming back down, it's actually pushing up.
And the profits need to keep being more, which means it's taking more from the planetary bounty, which is part of that going up, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very nasty calculations that underpins what David is talking about, and you can tweak it and you can play around with it, but the mindset ultimately needs to change. There are some things politicians can do very, very easily to sort of alleviate this situation, and I think we are in the sort of richer world moving towards higher retirement age, because these social security programs like pensions were set up when life expectancy was far, far lower. And what matters here from kind of an actuarial standpoint is not what your life expectancy is at birth, but what your life expectancy is from point of retirement. So if you're only going to be around another 5 years from the moment you effectively stop contributing, the systems could survive it. Now the life expectancy for someone going into retirement in the UK is like 19 years. That's a very, very different calculation from the ones that we set up these systems to actually provide for. So the first thing I think you radically need to just mechanically shift is retirement age. And we're doing that, but we're not doing it fast enough. Well, and that sits uncomfortably with the population approaching retirement, like ourselves, in David's and my case.
Well, there's an easier thing that you can do. And Joe and I, before the show, exchanged some kind of conversations and ideas and stuff. And we mentioned about the fact that, again, in the unsustainable truth, when we were researching that, we came across this restaurant in Japan called the Restaurant of Mistaken Orders. And the reason for it is, the food is great, but you never get what you ordered. That's its key. And the reason why you never get what is ordered is because all the servers suffer from dementia. They're elderly or young, but they suffer from dementia. And the essence of what that restaurant does is it says people have purpose no matter who they are or in what state they are. The retirement mentality robs people of that dignity, robs retirees of that dignity. They can only be travelers exploiting the world. That's the message of that retirement along. And when you then look, and it took me a long while to appreciate this. I lived in Japan at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, right? And you walk around and you think, there are all these constructions and stuff, and outside each, and you think, gosh, they employ so many people, they could do this with fewer, they don't need all this along. There's a guy in front of a building site, and he's there just waving the traffic on with a little very baton kind of thing. Inevitably, he's an elderly guy or an elderly woman who is in that sort of retirement kind of phase. But the point is, it gives actual connection still with society that is working along, as opposed to take them out and then say, that's a different lifestyle, that's a different planet you need to live off. Well, actually, we only have one, and it's the same one for everyone. So we actually retire in that way. We have to carve out two planets. There is a mathematical theorem called the Banach-Tarski paradox, which kind of says out of a system of choices, you can actually create two solid balls of the same size and volume, both solid, out of one. But we are not in that sort of paradox world. We're just staying with the one that we have. So pushing the boundary of the retirement age is one part, but that's never really going to happen because, again, politicians need to get elected. But changing the mentality over what retirement and engagement after retirement means. And that's switching from thinking, I do voluntary work, because then you're living off the profits of the planet, to actually, I need to live off, in some ways, the running cost of the planet.
Mm.
And when you do that, you start shrinking and start rethinking how you're engaging.
Yeah. Joe, do you want to sort of make any observations?
Well, I think the challenge here is about the social promise, or at least what people buy into, and they, when you walk into a place or walk into a relationship or a job or anything, right? You kind of come in with some expectations. And I think society has built up these expectations. It's a promise. Retirement's a promise that's written over a very long time. It's not just today's promise. It's something that we've all, built up layers and layers over. So like the way we look at things now is like when they talk about the retirement age going up, it's met with such horror, right? I mean, it's like the government's backing off the deal. And I'm speaking about the Singapore context, right, where we've moved the retirement age up, and it was such a political hot potato as well. And it comes in the context, actually, not of all the greater thinking that you know what David's talking about, which is a very realistic perspective on how it works. I don't think it's how people assess the problem. They don't think of it as that problem. It's not a financial problem. It's an effort problem. It's about I'm tired. I've put myself through all this time, and I'm therefore getting to the point where I should be retiring. And I do a webinar for NUS where we talk about healthy longevity, and it's about also changing expectations. So we have ageism built into our society now because we expect certain things as people get older, certain things that are going to turn out certain ways. We expect, like in terms of advice to people when they get older, especially when you get the economic curves in front of you, you notice that actually the reality is, for most people, the economic curve for your productivity is going to descend when you get to about 45, 50. It begins to shift downwards. The higher performers amongst us are able to defy the gravity of that, but for most people, that's the reality. But a lot of that has to do with also our own expectations going in. So we expect that we are going to become slower. We expect that we're going to figure out, we're going to find things more difficult. We expect that we're going to not remember things as easily. And what happens is we begin to make a smaller sized expectation for ourselves in terms of economics as well. So, it's not the easiest thing, I think, for any kind of government to try and turn it around. I don't know if the government can do it. I don't know if the people can do it because, again, The problem is this, which is the finance of it, but the way it's being judged is not in terms of finance. It's being seen differently. So to try to get someone to pay the price that they need to pay for this by doing that, it's going to be quite a challenge.
I want to add here what we're doing, which is that, we think that what really matters is the young people and the young professionals today, that they see their future. They see the social promise, as Joe's describing, as different, as something that they want to construct themselves that doesn't involve that retirement. Because if they fall into this same belief, and when their parents pass on their wealth and the grandparents pass on the wealth to them, and they invest it in that same way, which is basically what the whole financial industry is all about, then they have no hope for themselves. Then they are creating a case where, as Joe describes, about that shrinking kind of mentality. So
can I just sort of add some thoughts, because the solutions thing. So I think targeting the young people is great, but at the same time, I'm sure David and Richard, you appreciate their future's not looking that promising as it now stands anyway, right? So the concept of retirement for, say, a 20-year-old today, well, we're looking at a 3-degree world, and while some of the conversations, 2 degrees, we're going to hit 2 degrees before the end of this decade. Not in the 30s, not in the 40s, before the end of this decade. That's the end of the coral reefs.
Yeah.
And people talk about it like it's but like 3 degrees. We're still going to be alive. I mean, what? Hello, crop failures. The reefs are gone. The oceans will be dead. Like there's no 3-degree world that looks good. So I think there's a conversation that needs to happen. You look at the revolutions in France. Every time they start talking about increasing the retirement age, it's so violent, right?
Yeah.
But it's just like, come on, guys, we've got to be having a different conversation. We should be working in some form, like you were talking about in Japan, in Singapore. If you go, I don't go to McDonald's, but if I ever do, there's a lot of elderly people working there. Sometimes they're working because they have to. Not because they want to, because they're not getting the care of their families. But in Asian cultures, families tend to take care of each other. We've got, I've seen single people living in 4 or 5 bedroom family homes. They need to move out of those homes, so we can look at the housing crisis, which I think is because there's a lot of boomers living in very large properties, and they're attached to the memories of these homes, and that's why they want to stay there. But it's creating a societal issue that's creating societal problems that's impacting everyone. So, I think we've all got to start, when people say to me, what do we need to change? I'm like, we've just really got to change our thinking on a much, much bigger level. The boomer generation was always going to have a major impact on healthcare, on pensions, on the economy. And it's like everything that we've been witnessing for the last 20, 30, 40 years, the short-term vision of our leaders in politics, in business, quarterly profits, annual profits, that sort of stuff. And here we are, like modern wealthy countries are closing hospitals just as the boomers are starting to need those hospitals. What's that all about? So there's we've got to start, thinking about it. And let's not forget, 50% of the world at least will never get a pension. They will work until they die because they have no choice. So we're not all equal in this. But if that other 50% of the population started to invest in pensions, we'd be in trouble, right?
The thing about it is when you look through the numbers, there's only a few million households in terms of that population that's basically living off $10 trillion. Okay, so if you have 50% of the world actually looking in terms of pensions, then that's a disaster. That's a complete disaster in that way. You need to have 0% of the world, and that's how you can have 10 billion people. If you really want to. That's kind of the thinking you want. If you want 10 billion people, they all need to be living with the planet living
Yeah.
off
Yeah.
current income of the planet and being aware that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
I
And
think the
being
challenge.
absolutely accepting of what that means, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Mm. Now, I was going to say,
Okay.
I think the one thing that is a real challenge for our continued, survival, or at least thriving, is the problem about generational wealth. The idea that we can build it, make it last forever, and then give it to the next generation, and then they propel from there as well. And again, this is going to be something that I have mixed feelings about, because I very much want to do that for my family, but at the same time, what really ideally should work is you get to make as much of it as you want, but you have to give it away, or you have to stop having it once you die, right? Because because of the way wealth stays with those who are already rich, at least in the ways that it does right now, it causes the scarcity for everybody else. As in, like, you played the game, yeah, you win this round of Monopoly or whatever it is, but it should not impact the next round and the next round and the next round. As in, like, when new players come in, they can start afresh again. Everything gets distributed. But I mean, if you, I think it's fair enough to say, okay, well, while you're alive, it all stays with you. But after you're done, you have no need for the home. And maybe there's a limitation to the number of homes you can acquire that become unavailable to other people. In terms of the housing crisis. Yeah, so it's a kind of a complete change in the mindset. And one of the things that I've also been very much aware of is, I think part of how people decide what can be done and what should be done is in terms of the expectations of what their lifespan or health span is going to be about. So when I was involved with the cessation of smoking committee, I can't remember what the name of it was, but it was something sexy like that. I always thought about the youth and smoking this way, right? You can't stop the youth from smoking if they don't think there's something to look forward to. And because then why should I preserve my health? Why should I look out for the long term? The reality now is that people born today have a lifespan, a life expectancy of 100 years. That's the reality that you face, right? And because of healthcare and everything else. But what that really means is actually, in terms of the reality as well, is your professional life does have to be a lot longer than what we currently have as the usual expectations. So I agree that actually, for me, I mean, I personally hate the idea of retirement. I don't want to retire. I'd like to be productive until I'm done, or too embarrassing to go on, right? But it's one of those things where that's why I talked about ageism earlier as well, because of the way we look at certain aspects of aging as well. The things that we do, for instance, for the people who are older, that in a sense while it comes from a compassionate place, we're actually sort of hampering ourselves in the long term in our ability to move forward, right? You talked about people, for instance, who are working in McDonald's. It's not, at least in Singapore, I think it may be different in some societies. It's not seen as a source of pride. This man has a job; he's doing his thing. I think it's also like, even it takes a more developed society, such as Japan, to say that we're going to have a restaurant where old people work, and the feature is going to be that you don't know what you're going to get, right? So it's omakase by design. But it's a wonderful thing that happens for a culture that is looking at itself in terms of hundreds of years. So the Japanese, in their culture, in the way they look at things, has led to companies that have survived for hundreds of years, because I think at some point somebody thought about it, somebody spoke about it, and enough people said, yeah, that's a good idea.
All right,
It's
so
really-
Joe, I was just going to say, do you want to finish up, David, and then we'll move on? Because I actually think the the extension of this conversation naturally goes to artificial intelligence, especially when it comes to jobs. But David, do you want to finish up? Make a final point?
I want to pick up a bit from what Joe said from my kind of interpretation a little bit, and I think that where we end up coming from very much is to look at nature in that way, and think about how nature operates, because at the end of the day, at the end of the day, that's who we are. We are part of nature. This is nature with a capital N, is the thing that is all of us, that is around us with everything there. And when you look at that, the historical understanding of nature is about the big things, the big game, the big trees. The newer appreciation of nature is the tiny things, the microbes, the things that makes the soil healthy, the things that keeps the oceans actually healthy and able to live.
Phytoplankton,
and that's the aspect where we need to look at human society and contribution to human societies in the same way. And that's the way in which we can address this issue of us aging. We don't have to be the great leaders and the great champions, because what matters are the tiny bits, not the big bits. When you focus on the big bits, you end up creating this cult of retirement. The big things force the little things to overwork, that they then have to go and retire in that way. Nature emerges. Everybody contributes along. They discover their own place. And you know what? If they've now got dementia and they're in Japan, then there's a chance that they can actually keep working in that way as well. And it's interesting, you talk of AI, and I'll just finish off with another thing. There's another restaurant which is served by robots. The whole thing is served by robots. The robots are actually avatars of people who are bedridden and unable to do anything.
Interesting.
And they're remote everywhere, and they connect, and they actually then end up connecting with society by serving in restaurants that's entirely working through robots.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's really stands out to me in Asia, is the social cohesion focus. Making it's something I think Western countries could learn a lot from. Before we move on to AI, Nico's here. Hi, Nico. I am not following the story on Burkina Faso. Is anyone following it? He's asking if you think Russia has influence.
Richard, you're going to...
No, well, Burkina Faso is a... I'm going to embarrass myself with my geographical skills, but I think it's a small country in Western Africa, which I believe is landlocked. It's one of the poorest nations we have in the world, because the complete lack of resources and climatic difficulties and historical exploitation, etc. So it's not a rich country by any standard, and there has been some political developments there over the last couple of weeks. And call me an old cynic, but I'm very much in Nico's camp. People come in and they promise change and being radical, and then actually the people that have come to power tend to mostly look after themselves, in my experience.
Yeah.
Well,
it's a really poor country.
Yeah.
So the leader is very young.
Yeah.
They have there's kind of news that I'd followed about how there's a lot of kind of the social media has been the driver of politics, basically, and the social media content have often been faked in that way. And there's this connection that the leader has formed recently with Russia to kind of enhance their connection along. So there's the promise of the great future, but you go along through, and undoubtedly, I suspect that the Russians are involved with the social media campaigns, that they have been in many of the situations politically around the world. And so, I do think that Russia has influence, definitely, because the two countries, the two leaders. The last picture I met was kind of the two leaders meeting on friendlier terms than Trump and Putin.
Yeah.
So Nico's also added. So Nico was on the show end of last year talking about just being a refugee and what it was like, and he lives in Scotland, and he's basically saying because of alcohol and drugs in Scotland, people are dying before their retirement, so it is working. Yeah, so we've got this whole health culture that's going on, and a lot of the the bro sort of culture is all focused around that. So health and wellness and the RFK Jr. type stuff. But let's move on to artificial intelligence. And Joe is someone I have a lot of deep respect for when it comes to this. If I've ever got a question about AI, I always go to Joe because you're interested in it, right? But I think recently the social implications are really starting to come out. Like I was talking, I think a couple of weeks ago, they think 80% of white collar jobs, 80% of women will be impacted, 40% job losses. So this is going to have a big impact on societies around the world, especially wealthy societies. So, Joe, I'll hand it over to you.
Well, here's the thing. AI is coming for your job, and this includes you if you're the CEO. This is the thing that people are not really thinking about in terms of what AI will be used for. It's a tool, and it's a very massively powerful tool. And to not fully exploit it, and this is just purely from a perspective of utility. Obviously, there are the other implications that go along with it. But from a pure place of utility, this is what AI currently is in terms of at least the language models, right? It is the collection of as much of published human intellect that's been collected into a space that it can try and organize and analyze and use, and we have an ability to kind of interact with that. Right? It's foolish to say we won't use it, because that much of a resource, that much power, at the hands of the average person. I mean, never mind companies. At the hands of the average person, it is something that should be used. We're silly not to use it. The real challenge actually is about us. We're not prepared to have change happen to us. We're not prepared to change should change happen to us. And again, it goes back to the idea of the contract, right? So I can speak about this in terms of a time shift. I'm going to take you to another time when there wasn't AI, but the problem was very similar, and that is in the area of computing or computing science, right? Singapore actually is going through went through a phase and is continuing because of AI. It's made worse by AI, but a lot of Singaporeans got into computing, or at least going to learn about computer science, because of the social promise. It was much in demand. It was the future and everything like that. So you go and learn coding and you become a coder. And what happened is, again, to increase your value, what you became is somebody who grows higher and higher into the organization. So you did less and less coding and more managing. Right? And ultimately what happened is the bottom fell out in terms of the management side of coding. And in terms of where coding talent came from, it was from everywhere else where it came from. It was cheaper. You could get a coder from another country for much less than a Singaporean. And what happened was the Singaporean gets entrenched in the lifestyle that they get used to. They get used to the idea of, and they've actually made the commitments to entrench them in the lifestyle as well. They bought the big house. They have a big mortgage to pay. They're trapped in that kind of situation, so they have to earn a certain amount of money to live the lifestyle that they're in. Right? They're not prepared to make the change. But the fact is, the ground has changed. There is the thing that you signed up for, the thing that you wanted to do before, that has completely changed. The coder is not who you used to be. You're not talented as, or at least you're not as well versed as you should be in that particular area. The job that you wanted initially is no longer yours. It has moved away. AI is doing something like that. Not something like that. It's doing that to a lot of people, right? Now, if you're an accountant, you should be afraid, Because if you want your life to be exactly the same, if that's the premise of your thinking, then you have to be afraid. You have to figure out ways to protect yourself. You have to artificial ways to say, like, union rules and what have you, to say, no, we're going to keep this out. But I just want to think about this in terms of like tools, and why AI is so ubiquitous is because it's about humanity. It's not just in one area, right? If you think about the Excel sheet, that at some point was an existential threat to the way that kind of business was done. If you think about the traditional accountant and bookkeeping, Excel sheets, should have devastated that. And guess what? It did. It's completely irrelevant now for someone to have, unless of course you happen to be in an organized crime. And hello, if you're watching our show, the idea that you will not use that kind of software where all the tables are easy to address and you can do your research, right? So it's about the way things change. You move forward and you adapt and you go from there, and then you go like, how do I move forward with this? So the real challenge now with AI is a very large group of people, first of all, who do not know the change is coming and do not really understand the scale of the change, because many people that I've met, I almost fell into the trap saying many people are saying, have not actually used AI. So the number of people that I've met who have an opinion about AI and don't use it regularly is just staggering, right? And all they think is AI is ChatGPT, and all they think is a simple question. It shows you that AI is not that smart. I asked AI this question and got it wrong. And I go like, well, you don't kind of condemn the human race by saying, like, I had an intern the other day, I asked him a question about the internet and he got the answer wrong and all the references were bad. You go like, well, therefore interns are useless. Now, if you really learned the skills and you prompted them well and you figured out the whole thing, you can find very, very useful and powerful performance from an intern. AI is just 10 times, 20 times that. Now, we just understand this from a language perspective. AI is not just about language. AI is being applied to almost all aspects of manufacturing, right? So there's a concept of like digital twinning right now, which means that you don't have to, and this is the part that we need to be careful about, is that you no longer have to think about the things you used to think about. And the challenge to people, I would say, or anyone right now, is this: then you should think about what you need to think about instead, right? It can't just be, okay, I don't have to think about that anymore. I want to stay who I was before this. No, because that's not the game that you should be playing if you want to survive in the world of AI, which is now say, okay, well, now that I don't have to think about this, what else could I think about? What else could I do with my time that makes me better at what I do? And it's a big shift. I'm meeting so many people. I'm doing a panel next month. It depends on the schedule. Where we're going to talk about that as well. And people who are in creative industries are very much affected by this. So the launch of VO3 by Google recently, that's completely changed production, right? So the movie industry aside, which has been, Hollywood actually is the only way I'm going to say it. Hollywood has had its whole list of contracts and negotiations and all that sort of, they think they're protected. But for the rest of the world that doesn't care, and this is now literally true, people who used to spend $500,000 on a production budget that would have had actors, cameramen, sound guys, everybody else, have been able to produce equal quality. And this is we're talking about really high-end stuff for $500, right? That's a radical change. And if you want to hang on to the life that you had before and go like, I still want to fight that, it's not something that's, I would say, mentally healthy, right?
I did so I mean, I don't know if it's appropriate to give an example, as in, so I hate AI and I use AI, and
Yeah.
basically, so and people hate me for using AI, so Richard and I we're launching this course for young adults and young professionals called Thriving at Nature's Pace, and we want to hook it up to London Climate Action Week, which comes later in June. And the idea is to give them tools and confidence to be pioneers of a Thrive economy in that way. So we need some graphics for this, right? So can I just try and share something? Share screens, okay? Yeah. So I'm going to try and share screen, and share screen is easy as 2 monitors, or maybe I can share
Just
tab.
if you just go down below, you see present or invite, and you can add a image. So just while you're looking for it, David. So one of the problems we all know how much energy and water is used in AI, right? So when you're using AI for design, videos obviously more, going to take a lot more. But the other thing is, I've worked with designers. It's a skill. I'm not a designer. There are rules to design. So there's a lot more crappy design out there. Canva was the beginning of crappy design. But also we're taking money away from people all over the world who got into the gig economy and now and who are not expensive by Western sort of standards. But we're taking jobs away from people who's, could have like 5, 6, 7, 8 kids. And we're doing it ourselves through AI, which I actually don't think is very time efficient.
Well, this is the thing. So let me kind of come to some of that, right? So I'm going to find this.
You got it?
I got it. I just need to go through the computer to pass it over.
This is the part where we prove to everybody else that this is not AI generated at all.
So
you're still dealing with very analog people.
I was still dealing with very analog people. I'm just going to make sure that I'm actually passing the right picture along. So I end up generating. Did I just drop in there? Does that work?
It's not here yet.
No, can't see.
So okay, presenter invite, image file. I clicked on that, and okay, it's asking to find it now.
Right.
So there you go.
I found it useful for brainstorming. But sometimes I've got, Joe. Oh, there you go. All right, there we go.
So the course is Thriving in Nature's Pace. If anyone's interested, young person, young professional, is over 24th of June to 26th of June. 3 evenings, 7 to 9, 2 hours each. There's a fee, you get paid, and if you wanted more information, just get in touch. But the image on the left I used Google Gemini, and I asked it, give me a pioneer of a new world, and it showed me this what's his name, Indiana Jones type picture, going through the forest. And says, I said, no, make the new world the future, and this kind of more catastrophic future type thing. And then I just said, make the new world in a sunny day, give it an Asian city and an Asian person, and it gave this sort of thing that came along. And I said, well, I'd like some trees in there, and at this sort of Hollywood type tree front, and so put the trees in the building. And then it ended up with this. And I said, put the word pioneering a Thrive economy on top. That's it. That's what it did. And I thought, this is it. I put it up there. I created the invite, and I showed it the invite to my son's girlfriend yesterday. And she was looking at this, and she looked at the things. And the one thing she said was, I really like this picture. She didn't like the course or what it was saying, but she's saying, I really like this picture. And that's the thing about AI, because what it does is it's drawn from all the material that's out there at the moment. And that's how these models work. And basically, it represents how those things are. And therefore, what you get out of it is something that fits with kind of that psyche, that angst, that zeitgeist of all the material that's out there. And so it's not surprising that she says, I like this picture. But the time it took is really short. And this is where, going back to Joe's comment, this is where that threat to all the artists and all those people. And I was talking to another friend, and he was trying to summarize all his blogs into a book. And he was throwing them all into an AI, seeing how it comes out, and allow it to do that. And obviously, as Joe says, it doesn't quite get it right. But the fact is, people are exploring how they use it and what they use it for. And these are people who are doing the jobs that other people are currently doing, and armies of other people are currently doing. But they are individually doing it themselves. Now, that can be a great thing. The thing I hate about the AI is the environmental cost of it. And that environmental cost is also the social cost. As in, the social cost is also the environmental cost. It's like the shit show and the polycrisis. They're kind of interlinked in that way.
Yeah. So I want to talk. So I was very much in the .com boom and bust, and I feel like AI right now is the .com boom. And I remember it was in 1999 that we all heard flowers.com for the first time, and the whole world went nuts, right? It was only 2 years later, I was working in Boston for a PR company, and this company reached out to me, and they were tractors.com. And they said, can you represent us? And I'm like, no one cares about .coms anymore. This was before the crash, right? I said, no one cares anymore in the media. Like, it's been done to death, even tractors.com. But what the other thing that was obviously happening at the time was what we're seeing now in AI. There's all these little, like I reached out to Joe the other day, and I'm like, I'm just trying to create an app, right? And it's so confusing. Like, there's so many different tools out there. There's so many different names, and there's criticism. And then the majority of the conversation around AI is so boring. Oh, look, you can do this. Look, you can do that. I don't care. I really don't care. Andrew Chow, I said last week, he ran a AI sort of masterclass for a group of us a couple of weeks ago, and I could see the platform potential of it. Because to me, it's what can I do to make a bigger positive impact in the world. I will use AI if I can do that, but I won't use it for useless things, and I won't take a job away from someone if I don't have to, because I think design skills. I definitely respect design skills, and it's not one of my skills. So I really respect the talent. But then when you look at it more broadly, right, the societal impacts. Governments are not getting ready for this. They're not talking about taxing the AI companies. So like, we're going to see the AI bust soon, and that's going to have a dramatic impact on the economy. And all these little companies that, 15, 20, 100 of them do the same thing. One of them will be picked up by Microsoft, and the rest will just disappear overnight. That will happen, and it's going to happen really, really quickly. And we're at the beginning of that sort of roll up, and that's going to have an economic outcome like we saw with the .com bust. So we've got the tedious conversation. Oh, look what you can do with AI. Then we've got the business conversation of, where's it going? And no one really knows, not even the people designing it. Then we have the panicked conversation. So apparently, I think it was the CEO of the company that owns Claude, which is Anthropocene or Anthrop something. They tested one of their products in-house to a really extreme edge, and apparently the AI was saying, I'm going to reveal all this information about you, but the media never gives it the context that it was done in a test environment. So then it just creates this panic around AI. Then you've got the environmental impacts of AI. Like across, like we're going to see heat waves blast across the world, and the contracts between the AI companies and the data center companies, whoever owns them, for water and energy will outweigh the people who live in those towns and cities, their right to water and energy. And then we're going to start seeing people die because of AI. This is coming, right? It's on the way. But where it's really going to start happening isn't going to be in the wealthy countries. It's going to be in the poorer countries where corruption and all those other things happen. So it's a really big and complicated conversation. But the number one thing that has to happen now is, how are we going to get ready? So there was another video I think I shared with you guys the other day talking about the Great Depression, where there were 20% job losses. So they're talking 40% job losses. We don't remember the story, because not just because we weren't around, but because the people of that time wrote the story, and they didn't write the story of suffering. So we actually don't know what a 20-40% job loss in our societies actually means, because there's no history that really grabs hold of it, because the people who won told the story of that history. Do you know what I mean? So it's a big complicated thing.
Yeah, the context matters hugely, I believe. I think we always have a great deal to learn from history, and we are very poor at doing so, because clearly there are evidence that we haven't learned an awful lot on a daily basis, encountering me in the news. And the aspects of AI, and I'm probably, at the very bottom of the understanding of what's actually it might bring and might do. But the aspects that worry me is that you are effectively moving into a arbitrage situation where AI is knocking out other jobs, and it's doing so in a non-level playing field, because you're effectively abusing the resources of the planet by doing so.
Yeah.
If energy was priced at a different level, or if it wasn't available, you wouldn't be able to build data centers at this unbelievable, pace that we are doing to be able to cope with the demand that's occurring. And that's the aspect that is really sitting at the bottom of my thinking around it. And the little I've used it, some areas, it's massively impressive, the information you can get out of it. The application of that information so far, when I encounter it, not mind-boggling by any standard. So there's still a long way to go. And if you look at the amount of money spent so far, and this is again the investor in me talking, I'm somewhat underwhelmed by the results, given the amount of capital that has been deployed. I would have expected more based
Welcome
on
to the tech industry.
Yeah, the actual amount being thrown at it.
Yeah. It's like the fission fund. It's like the fission fund, right?
Seriously,
yes.
Seriously, but I was just going to say, but seriously, but it's a really good point, and it needs to be emphasized. I remember in the .com revolution. So I'm based in Boston. So there's at that I think even today, really, there's only two real tech zones in the US. It's California and Boston, where the universities are. I was working with these companies who were selling ideas. They hadn't built the infrastructure behind it, and they were getting millions and millions and millions of dollars invested. And what they were competing for was to be bought by the big company. That's it. But they actually were not delivering a product, because the product wasn't even created yet.
Well, there's a coding company,
Amazing.
Codium, which is now Windsurf, which is, I think, it's about to be bought or has just been bought for $3 billion by ChatGPT. And what it does, and here's the part that people don't particularly realize, what it does is it uses AI to code. And it's great, but what happens is a lot of the concerns about it is that when a coder codes, there are security protocols that you follow to ensure that things stay safe in that way. There's no such guarantee as you start doing this, and they creep in. These insecurities creep in. So we are going to see a whole generation of rapidly produced apps that are entirely insecure, which goes back to Joe's comments right back about, kind of palatine and that situation about that access to data, that access to control of who you are, and the effects of that. And there was some research done. It's not so much the extreme as such. There's some research done, which is exactly kind of like, to take the intern example. If you have an intern, he hangs around with a group of kind of your worst employees, if you imagine, as it were. And he's going to pick up habits, and he's going to have his imagination run. He's going to think this is okay to do, and he's going to end up leaning more towards that later on in how he guides and runs the place. And so what this experiment that was done was where it allowed coding to learn from codes that had insecure features in it. And the AI itself generalized to introduce malice into other tasks, whether it's a picture it was generating or a video or a text or whatever, that it actually translated further. And so when it was acting as when they try to use it as a therapist chatbot, then it would actually come up with pretty harmful suggestions to sort of tease people in that way. So the generalization is the thing that goes on behind this, and that data process, we got a lot of crap in the materials learning from.
Yeah. It was funny. I want to finish off, and then I'm going to hand it back to Joe just to sort of conclude. So the other day I started reading an article and then I lost it. If you open an article on LinkedIn, you've got to put it somewhere, otherwise you can lose it, right? And basically it was talking about the benefits of AI for neurodivergent people, like massively, hugely beneficial, which I thought was a really positive read. So I've got to find this article. And then I was reading another one. So one of the things I always get really disturbed by is how much data we willingly give away. Yeah. And we've been doing it for years, right? Yeah. So any woman who has a menstruation app, to me, is like, it doesn't make any sense to me why any woman would allow somebody, and by the way, Palantir, Peter Thiel's company, owns one of those lifestyle apps. So people are already willingly giving over this data. We have our health apps. So I don't have anything in one place. I have lots of different things that I use, but none of them I use consistently. So there's no way that you can really track me on that sort of stuff. Consciously, I do that. Most of us don't consciously think about anything. We give it all away. So I was reading this article just before we came on. Or I haven't gotten through it, but this lady was saying how she used it as a therapist, and it's one of the selling points, right? But all of a sudden, artificial intelligence knows your deepest, darkest secrets, fears, concerns, what you're ashamed of, and we're putting that into this system that we don't even know what it does with it, So I think we've got to wake up a little bit. But I want to hand it over to Joe, maybe to finish it. We can move on to the last section. What do you reckon, Joe? You're on mute.
You mute.
No, he's not
so
on
the
mute.
The solution that I was going to suggest, for everyone else, what you should do with it is to get ahead of it, is to use it, to interact with it, to do the active searches and figure out what AI can do, because it doesn't matter what your opinion is about it. If you have an opinion about a tsunami, it's not going to make a difference, right? The difference is what you do in preparation of that. Get yourself to higher ground, decide a plan, and get better at it. And I mean, the somewhat glib way of looking at things is that if you see a big wave coming, you can either try to oppose it or try and figure out how to surf it, right? Yeah. And I think that's what you should really try to do. I mean, try and push beyond the beliefs that you already have about things, and this is regardless of where you are actually, in terms of the way you earn your living. So if you're an artist, I mean, like myself, I'm a voiceover as well, right? One of the many things that I do. So I don't want to put myself out there as the ultimate answer to things, but do as many things as I do that have value, because bit by bit it's going to be worn away. But I do voiceovers, and one of the groups that have been very upset by AI is the voiceover industry, because now you can get very good voiceovers done that way. Now, I could decide that, therefore I can take that view as well, or I can say, well, how could I try it out and see how I can make it work? So I actually have digitized my voice at 11 Labs, tried out what it can do given that digitization. And, for certain kinds of applications, that actually is quite an okay performance. I mean, it reads much better than I do. It's more, it's able to do long sentences without having to take a second take. And, maybe without as much emotion, but it kind of works. And so for the right kind of application, it actually does the better job. But I also know the limitations. So I know where I start to be better than AI. Now, is it going to be continuously the case? Will it be forever? Well, up to about a month ago, actors could say, you know what, AI can't do what I need to do. People who did camera work and directors and all that say, well, it can't do all that. VO3 from Google, if you haven't watched any of the stuff that's come out, especially the best examples of it, you really should. So if you're on the internet on a separate screen right now, go and search for pharmaceutical AI generated commercial, and you'll see what AI can do. And the budget for that, by the way, was 500 credits, and is done by a guy who was in and is actually in production. His whole business has been disrupted in the sense that it used to cost $500,000 to make a commercial of that quality. And it literally cost him 500 credits, which is more than most people pay for AI stuff. But, he produced that as well. So go check that out if you can. It is really remarkable stuff. And just know that, there's very little point arguing with it, but it's more a case of what are you going to do with this? Given all these things and assuming that they're going to be true, what can you do that makes you valuable in the world, that makes you okay with your status in the world as well, because it's going to be affected by what's coming.
Tell me, Joe, what would your advice be to people who are just feeling really overwhelmed by the avalanche of AI? Like, so many different tools, so many different ways of going about it. Like, I can reach out to you and say, help me. What would you recommend? Like a starting point? I downloaded DeepSeek because you said it was awesome. And because I don't fear China. So I basically downloaded a whole bunch and just sort of said, all right, let me go and check you out. But what would you recommend? Rather than, because it is overwhelming, the amount of information out there.
Well, you know what? Any one of the main chat platforms, ChatGPT, is probably the easiest to go with because there's so much work that's being developed on it. Is the one I would say, start there. It's the easiest. DeepSeek is for somebody who's trying to do a little bit more extra stuff. Okay, but I'll keep it simple. It's all about the prompt, and you can actually get the coach you need on ChatGPT. And if you don't consume too much of it, you can get what you want. Here's the prompt you want to put into ChatGPT. Assume the role of a coach that understands that you are trying to help me with my future career. I have some anxiety regarding technology and the role of AI and jobs. And I would like to have a discussion about the topic with you. You are a world-class coach and therapist. Let's begin.
Nice.
Right? Now, it's going to be freaky, but if you lead into it, you'll be surprised at what can come out of this process. Because of the way AI, LLMs are built on this vast knowledge of everything that's been consumed. Now, we could talk about the ethics of the consumption of it, but of all that information and all that knowledge that's been consumed, it will be very useful what it can lead you through. And I've been truly amazed by it. And if you want some data or some information that backs all this up as well, I was talking to somebody from NUS, from the psychology department, and they were talking about the research that found that therapists, or at least people who went for therapy, not knowing that it was a chatbot on the other side, actually got better therapy than human than from a human therapist in general, and they felt better about things. They found more clarity, and a lot of that has to do because AI can be trained. AI can learn to do can learn to figure out the right way to do things because it learns from a human teacher. It learns from the writings of somebody who has put out words on coaching and therapy. and it learns about frameworks. And as it develops, it begins to understand how to follow those frameworks as well. So it will deliver that. So yeah, try the prompt. Hit rewind and put that very wordy prompt. Oh yes, by the way, it comes to prompting. One thing is, don't be shy about using a lot of words. Just waffle on and say, you know what? Oh yeah, and by the way, I need this, and if you can do that, and whatever, put it all in, and it finds a way.
Yeah, there's no special. A lot of people talk about prompts, and then they're like, "Oh, what is a prompt?" You just have a chat. But like David and Richard, I'd suggest talk about your books, talk about your game. What else can you do with it? And they'll come back with lots of ideas, and some of them you'll be like, "No, I don't want to do anything like that." So you can, but no, you're wrong. Or I'm always like, but no, I don't want you to rewrite this. I want you to tell me how to do it better, but I don't want you to rewrite this because it's important that I write it. I sort of have those conversations.
I think that's right, and actually we have been doing that with it in that way. We have kind of asked it, how do you devise this and what can you do with that kind of thing. And but I'd like to bring one thing out, which is a very different sort of perspective and goes back to some things we said before in a way. And I want to take up from Richard's points about energy in that way. We all know AI uses a lot of energy in that sense, but the thing we don't do is personalize it. We don't bring it on to say how much energy am I using through the sequence of all the things that it might be. And that applies as much to say, the Norwegian oil company Equinor using wind energy in order to get itself to be carbon neutral in what it does, right? So the oil that you get out of it looks like it's carbon neutral, but it's actually very energy intensive because of all the stuff that it's done to do that. So and a conversation with Andrea is less energy intensive than a conversation with an Andrea like AI because of the energy that's involved in there. It
depends on your perspective on that one.
Nice. All right, I'm gonna move. No, it's true, and I think being aware. Most people aren't aware. All right, I'm gonna go through. We're going to move on to the planetary crisis because, of course, that's really important, especially to us. That's another area of overwhelm, and there's some big stuff coming out at the moment. Like I said, 2 degrees is in the mix now this decade, and that's a big story just in its own right.
It's just gone. It's gone. I think it's not worth talking about. That's gone.
Yeah, and there was an article yesterday in the New Scientist basically saying that there's different ways of measuring warming, and they think it's completely underestimated, and we're, by 2029 we'll be past 2, like permanently past. Oh no, by 2027 we'll be permanently past 1.5. So we're only 2 years off going past it. Yeah. Whereas right now most people say it's, give or take 10 years. But yeah, these are not good things. But there was a piece in The Guardian, and the article was Half the Tree of Life, Ecologists' Horror as Nature Reserves Are Emptied of Insects. And it starts with this story of this guy called Daniel Jansen. When he was a young man, he's in the forest in Costa Rica, and he fell over and he was taking photos, and he smashed his camera into his rib, broke a bunch of ribs, and had to crawl back to this hut where he strapped himself to a chair so his bones could mend before he could actually go back and get some sort of proper medical help. So this was 50 years ago, right? And while he was sitting there on his strapped to his chair, basically he noticed the life that was unfolding around him. And he said every branch of every tree seemed to host its own small metropolis of creatures hunting, flying, crawling, eating. It's really quite a visually beautiful article at the beginning. And one of the things, so basically every evening he got, they got 2 hours of electricity of a 25-watt light bulb. So 50 years ago, remember? And he put this sheet up, and there were 3,000 species of insects on that tarp. Mm-hmm. He's 86 today, and there's basically no insects left. Now, this is not an area that is got a lot of pesticides. It's not in the city. It's out in the bush. This is a dramatic loss of insect life, and it's been replicated around the globe. So in Germany, flying insects across 63 insects reserved have dropped by 75% in less than 30 years. In the US, beetle numbers have dropped by 83% in 45 years. And in Puerto Rico, insect biomass has dropped by up to 60-fold since the 1970s. Now, it's obviously not just insects, because once you lose insects, you lose all these other things. So there's this guy in Texas who basically goes out looking for insects and everything else. So it's not just the insects that have basically disappeared. It's the lizards. It's things like the things that eat lizards and things like snakes. And he's going out into the desert and there's nothing left. In other areas, like so basically what they're saying is we've lost nearly half the tree of life in one human lifetime. So insectageddon is a word that was phrased a few years ago now, but it's also resulting in a sharp decline in birds, lizards, and other creatures, insects for food. So there was a story a few weeks ago that in the US, bird population has dropped by 3 billion, and the insects that don't, the birds that don't eat insects have actually increased. So the vast majority are insects, and of course, without insects, life's not looking that good for the rest of us. So it's a really powerful piece. I'd recommend having a look at it, because the other thing that they're really focusing on now is that climate change is now the primary reason for what's happening. So as it gets hotter, there's a synchronization in nature where, if you usually get 3 months of heat and now you're getting 5 months of heat, when insects wake up, when they eat, where they live underground, where they get oxygen, all that sort of stuff gets messed up. Another article, half the world's population endured an extra month of due to climate change in the last 12 months, so May to May 24 to 25. So 4 billion people. They're talking about, people in, what's the country? Let me see if I can find it. Caribbean islands were really, really hammered. Or is it? I can't. I think it's Puerto Rico. 161 days of extreme heat, and people just basically can't go outside. Most people don't really sort of think extreme heat is an issue. I'm always talking to people saying, "Oh, we're so used to the heat." You're not used to this heat. This is dangerous wet bulb temperatures, please. I've shared Singapore last year at 188 days above wet bulb temperature. It usually has 4. So this is not normal. Don't be playing tennis in the middle of the day. That makes you an idiot. And you could die or get organ damage, like damage to your kidneys. So extreme heat. It's getting hotter. And we need to be aware of it. The final one I want to talk about is wind. So wind is causing both heating and melting. So in Antarctica, basically impacting Thwaites and Pine Island ice shelves. So Thwaites is obviously the Doomsday Glacier. They haven't understood why the glaciers are melting so rapidly. Obviously, everything I'm going to be talking about here will be in the weekend reads. But basically, there's a wind that is going across this region that they've only just been able to track. So this is always the thing for me about climate science. There's so much that we don't know, just because how do you get to Antarctica and do these things? So one of the reasons that they believe Antarctica and those big glaciers are melting fast is because of an excessive wind. And then, in the north, we're hearing a lot about AMOC, and they're trying to understand what's going on. So wait a minute, where is it? I think this is also unprecedented heat in the North Atlantic Ocean kickstarted Europe's hellish 2023 summer. Also wind, and basically it was a lack of wind that meant the upper layer of the ocean absorbed more solar radiation, which warmed it up, which was also linked to the fact that they reduced the sulfates in the shipping fuel. So they think that that is the reason why. And there's this big blob. You might hear about this big blob up near Greenland. So this is all linked to that. The big blob's back. So the prediction is that this summer we're going to see some really, really brutal heat. So wind is a big part of the story, and clouds. So there's a reduction in clouds. But I thought adding the wind into the mix was an interesting one. Thoughts?
Yeah, it's pretty grim picture you're painting. We know it's happening.
Shit show, right?
Yeah, and I think it's worth kind of connecting back to the insect story somewhat, because the vast majority of people out there, I think, has kind of a nebulous understanding of what will actually happen to crops that we desperately need to feed the world if insects drop below a certain level. And I have noticed in my 21 years living where we're living right now, always have had greenhouse, that actually there are fewer bumblebees and there are fewer normal bees around than there used to be. Visually can see it because it was always full of all sorts of insects, and they are absolutely instrumental in pollination, and we will not have crops without them. And you look and you hear about the bee farmers of Europe saying, honey production is dropping because myriad of pesticides and Asian hornets are affecting, regular bees. We are going to struggle at the very base of the food pyramid if these ecosystems go just a little bit further out of balance. And again, it ties back to the one area that policymakers tend to disregard, certainly when they're setting policies, like the price of food going up. No, it won't affect me because it's excluded from my measure how I conduct policies. Like, this is the most important aspects of people's cost, is actually food and accessibility. And we're going straight at the very heart of that before our eyes by just looking at how the insect population is shrinking. When you're driving your car, I noticed there are fewer insects on my windscreen than there were 5 years ago and 10 years ago, when you had to stop every now and then and just clean them off. It's happening before our eyes, and the link to how it will affect each and every one of us comes through the price mechanism for food, because we will not have crops without insects.
Yeah, and you look at the UK crop predictions, they're not looking good. Europe,
No.
40% has slid into drought. It's like,
I mean, you're having serious drought problems already. This is very early. Technically, in Italy, summer doesn't really commence until July. We tend to think of June as being pre-summer in Italy. And the main summer month will always be August. But September is probably considered much more of a summer month than June. But the heat and the drought you're seeing in particularly the southern parts of Italy are quite extreme for this time of the year. And of course, it's going to affect food production. And for southern Italy, it's mostly olive oil that's being produced. And I think we all recognize, because I love olive oil, I use it for everything. The price hasn't exactly gone down the last 3 years, putting it mildly.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing.
Stocked
when
up.
you talk about insects, it means your food price goes up.
Yeah.
So it's just, I think for many people, the real connection is that it doesn't matter whether you live in the city and you never see an insect anyway, but you do buy food.
You got to eat.
Yeah. It's huge. And that story of the insect apocalypse, or insect apocalypse, whatever they called it, that's in natural environments where there's no pesticides, there's no lights, there's no city lights, there's none of the, and why that's important to point out is when human impact wipes out insects, there's always insects outside of the human impact zone, and those insects are now dying en masse. So that means if we take the human impact out, they're not going to bounce back. And so that's a real tipping point, right? And we hear a lot about tipping points. And it is, It is grim, but I think we're on the cusp now where we just need to say, are we going to do this? Are we going to do this? And we need to get to work and do it really, really quickly now. I always talk about being in Phuket during the pandemic. We were off the beach. We were going into the ocean, coming face to face with giant turtles snorkeling, right? Because there were no boats. There were no people. And life bounced back. We went out to the Similan Islands while the world was still closed down. Magnificently beautiful. They bounced back because people weren't around. So we can bounce back, but we've got to get really serious and really quickly we've got to stop drowning, emptying the oceans, this whole seabed mining. No, we just got to wake up.
You need to give the planet a chance, for God's sake.
Yeah.
It's like if the planet provides for us, stuff grow, crops grow, animals grow bigger in size, but you give it a chance to actually be in a natural growth rate instead of taking all the chips off the table, which is kind of how we approach it at the moment.
Comments on this giving a chance and stuff, and there's kind of like another side of of that part which we don't often think of. That's patience. So we know oil, gas, and coal are sources to provide energy, and when we get worked up about something and we want to do something, we need energy, and so ultimately it ends up more of that being used. It facilitates all of the things that makes the polycrisis happen, whether it is a deep fake thing that's going on, or a piece of AI you're using, or kind of like the directly changing temperature causing the insects, or whichever way you think. So one thing that Richard and I used to say, and we should say more again, when we were asked, what are the 3 things, the most important things you should do? And the 3 things we came up with was, don't panic. Yes, it's a shit show, but don't panic, because panicking causes you to do more things, causes you to go running around headless chicken syndrome, basically. And you end up trying to fix everything without really thinking about you in that way. Keep a sense of humor. If you can't have a sense of humor, you're not really going to be a fun person to be around. And then everybody runs away from you, and it's never going to work. And the final one is the most important one. And it goes to what Andrea was talking about in the lockdown and all those things. Do less. When you do less, you give nature a chance. You learn to be more patient. You learn to be able to discover yourself. You learn to realize that you don't need to be doing all the things and so on. And you actually find a purpose. So do less. So don't panic. Keep a sense of humor and do less. And then nature will manage to find a way to get the insects back.
Yeah. I would say you got to we talked about it a couple of weeks ago. We've got to reduce our material and energy consumption by 70%. Most of us. And most people
without changing much of our life. We really think about our life. You live like me in London in that way. I can do that without really changing much of my life, which is bizarre.
It's true, you can. Cutting out meat or reducing it significantly, only buying 5 articles of clothes a year, walking, using public transport. There's lots of ways we can all really massively reduce our consumption.
Don't browse that TikTok or that Google search when you actually don't need to.
Yeah. And don't create too many videos on artificial intelligence, because that's a massive suck.
No, but it is. I accept it's a contrarian point of view, because you only need to turn on the television to watch the morning news, and you have a politician telling us we need more growth, and that ties back into our demand for things to keep on growing because we demand too much. Ultimately, you need to actually be at ease with what you got in some sense, and that requires the huge mentality change we started out talking about when we came on air this morning. And I'm not even going into the fallacy of how we measure growth, because that probably warrants an episode all of its own. But you have to come to the point in your life where you actually appreciate that sometimes less is more.
I think you just define growth. When you have less time, that's growth.
Or more time.
Yeah, it's
It's a
When you
peaceful
end up
process.
finding less time.
Yeah, but it is. It's I found it a really because it's. I mean, I've been doing it for years, and you just sort of strip away parts of your life, and you go, how can I live better? From a harmony with the planet perspective, right? And it's like, well, how many shoes do I buy? How many clothes do I buy? You know, how do I eat? How do I clean my home? What stuff do I use to wash my clothes? You just sort of go through it, and it's not a one-time thing. It's whatever your starting point is. It's like, oh well, that feels really good. What else can I do better? And you start going through a process. Like learning to cook differently is a process. It's not something you just wake up one day and you can cook a gourmet vegan feast. It's a really hard thing to do well, and so it's a process, and it's a joyful process. And I think that's the thing most people don't really sort of think, that they're scared to even start because they think it's a negative thing. Like if you love traveling the world, then you cut out. But eventually you're not going to be able to travel the world if we don't wake up, because we're going to overshoot in every possible way. And we're either going to be fighting for our lives or staying put because, it's too hot for planes to fly in the sky, and they're going to start dropping out of the sky. We're already seeing increasing turbulence, So we either do it or we do it or we don't, I understand the consequences if we don't. I've accepted it, but I'm doing everything I can to do what I can, as well as communicating so that I can help other people to see. And that's what we're all doing, right? In our own way.
Of course.
Hmm.
There you have it.
All right. So we've got a couple of final things. So we're going to ask Joe to make a recommendation every week. And if he hasn't got one of us will have it, on an AI tool. And you've talked about AI today, so it might be a bit harder today. I've made a note of 11 labs, because I actually think that could potentially be a tool where you record your voice. You don't have to do too much, and then it can basically do your voice, right?
Yeah.
Which means you could potentially do your ebooks that way. Audiobooks.
Absolutely. If you can record a good performance, it will be able to recreate a rather nice even tone, and then the results are very, very good. It's kind of, you get the feeling of uncanniness, because it's like, okay, that's saying a lot of things I didn't say before, but you could do that.
Okay. Well, any tool that you've sort of, I mean, what about the recommendation you gave me this week or last week, whenever it was, which I signed up for, by the way?
There are a number of things out there, and I also want to say that there is in the world of AI and development of AI, there's also the business of aggregation of AI. So there's people who are actually doing the AI work on the front line, and then there are people who are looking at the business opportunities as well. So proceed with care, but there's some aggregators out there that can actually help you put together a few different AI tools. Now, I won't mention the one that I first gave you because I feel it's a bit scammy. But the one that I most recently gave you, I think, was by the people at Chat LLM. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it was basically what's the name of it now? But it essentially it's an agent. So it's an agent AI. Do you have that? It's much easier for you to look at text while I'm trying to search my brain for this.
Abacus.ai. I've got
so abacus.ai. So they've been in the, so they're actually people who, so the new offering that they've got is called Agent, and it is essentially one of those AIs that can solve a problem for you with a prompt. So instead of you trying to figure out what you need to do next, and that and the other, I'll give you another recommendation as well after this. But the essence of an agent is that it is able to do more of the kind of problem solving or the work that you need to solve your problem for you, So a real life example of something that I did was I was trying to figure out a way for, it's going to sound very technical, but I was trying to figure out how do I get the video feeds off of Zoom and bring it into my other software so I can use it. It's quite a complex program. So the reason why I put it, I had that problem is because I couldn't solve it on the internet. It wasn't, well, I should qualify. I couldn't solve it for free on the internet. There were solutions that you had to pay for, and I'm just too cheap to do that, right? So I said, okay, well, let me see. Is there a way I can do this? So I posed the problem. I won't talk about the prompt I used, but I posed the problem to the AI I was using, the agent AI I was using, and what it did was it went out to find out how it was done. Now I knew for a fact that finding the answer on the internet was difficult. So this task was remarkable because it went out, it figured out all the different things you needed. It figured out the kinds of licenses that you're going to need to make this happen. And then it actually went on to code the solution as well. Now, I haven't tested the code yet because it's not my field of expertise, so I don't know if it's going to work for sure. But I'm talking to somebody in that field to verify this. But again, agent at Abacus is one of those. They have other features as well that can support your other AI needs. But the one that I was using was the one that came out and made the news some time ago, again from China. Manus, 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 and again, it's just an agent where you pose the problem that you have, and it goes out and tries and figures out different kinds of solutions for you. And because it is an agent, it can make some active decisions for you as well. Now, I'm going to say that as much as this sounds remarkable, I am nowhere close to the leading edge of AI, where you can have an entire solution created for you by someone who knows what they're doing. Creating a whole thing for your business where you have your own call center without having to spend any kind of call center money on it. It's completely possible.
I don't think that's what most people need, Joe, and that's why I wanted you to share. I don't think that's so. Abacus. So one of the things is ChatGPT. You pay $20. Claude, you pay $20. Perplexity, you pay $20. And you kind of you're sort of sitting there, and the truth is, you have to pay to get the real value. Everything's free, but I tried things on Claude for free, and since doing Abacus, which is $10 a month at the moment, that's why I wanted to emphasize it. So it's got DeepSeek, it's got Claude, it's got ChatGPT, it's got all the different apps in it, right? So you're paying $10, so you're going to get a better experience of the app. So you're going to work out what you like, and then if you want to go and then just download a single platform, you can do it or whatever. But because that's the bit for me that it was like, I'm not going to pay for all of these different things. That's just stupid. That would be stupid of me.
I think what happens out of that is like what's happened to news, basically.
Yeah.
The quality that people are comfortable and used to and they will accept will come down. So I mean that's the problem that Richard talks about in terms of the pricing of this market, of this industry in that way, because people will end up just sort of saying, okay, I can do so much, that's fine, and so on. A friend of mine used a blog he had and got an AI to generate a podcast with two people speaking, where the AI and so on, and that will end up being used, and the ones that generate it will be the cheap ones and the free ones and so on, because people will get used to it. So this aspect of quality is because we come from that world. If you look at the news today, the quality of it is absolutely nothing like what it was, and yet everybody now thinks that's the quality of news.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's. I mean, this I think it's hugely important because it ties back to the whole misinformation and steering that we've talked about. To have really good news service, you actually need to pay, because investigative journalism is not cheap. To have opinions, and in some aspect, we are in this category today. We express opinions. Is what people nowadays see as news. But to drive real journalistic value, you need to be prepared to spend money on investigative journalism. That cannot be done cheaply. Opinions, you can have the chat GPT basically talking for you. But we are at the point, like David says, where this has become the accepted norm, that even news should have some form of entertainment in them to make people watch. I mean, it drives me nuts. It literally does.
But they have to. That's the only way they make. That's the problem, right, with social media. They took out the business model of the news, and the media have never been able to work out how to resolve that issue, right? I think they should just do things like the Financial Times. I don't like. I pay for 6, 7 media publications because I think it's important. But like, I'm not going to subscribe. I'm not going to pay for the Financial Times. I'm just not. It's not one. But it would be for you both, right? Every now and again, I can access an article. But like, if they had just a little button where I could pay $1 to read an article, I'd do that. Because it's only every now and again that I really want to read something from the Financial Times.
Well, the problem with Financial
Times, but I can't pay for it all.
It isn't that great quality. If you read the headline, you know exactly what it's going to say in the whole article. So.
But it's more about I try and get a diversity of media that I'm tracking, so I'm not just following one source. And some are worth paying for because I want to support them. And if you want to help with the shit show, spend money, and you can afford to, obviously, so pay for media, because if you pay for the media, you get less shit media. Because they've got they can have a business model again. They don't know how to make money, so they've gotten into clickbait because they have to, because it's the only way that they can get money through advertising. So it's our fault too.
Of course it is.
Expecting everything for free.
You get ultimately what you pay for. You get what you want in that respect, or don't. And it's interesting to note that there are some hugely profitable, very, very high quality news/research publications out there, but they're terribly expensive because investigative journalism costs. So you are basically priced yourself out from where households or individuals can pay for it, and these are totally directed at corporates who needs that kind of intelligence to make decisions about what they want to do, and what is there a real risk for me to build a factory in Morocco. And then you pay for that. And that comes at a very different price tag. But if 20 years ago, I could probably have gathered that information from watching the news and reading high quality journalistic content in papers, I can no longer do that. So I need to take a different route and actually pay someone who has that expert knowledge. And there are numbers of sort of peripheral friends of mine who do this kind of work. And they say it's not super lucrative, but it gives me the lifestyle I want because I'm interested in doing this. And I could never, ever have kept my job at my old place because they're not prepared to pay me to write and investigative things that interest me. And I think the public, in this case, a limited public, has an interest in paying for. So you have bifurcated the media space into super high content quality that is now more or less out of the reach for households and individuals. And then you have the mass market, which is basically a blend of entertainment and very low quality content.
I think it's important to recognize the market that you are trying to tap. And then, I think the age of mass media, I mean, look, it's an old phrase now, but it's gone, right? It's not really the way things are done anymore. And finding your niche audience that's willing to recognize or reward you appropriately is very important. But I think the financial aspects of it also are something to think about, because there are different ways of addressing it. Like, if you talk about stuff that is free, right? And you go like, well, therefore it can't work. It depends on the model. You can decide how you build a model, and as long as you can be true to the model, you can actually get some you can deliver some really good value. But I mean, one of the big things that is happening now is more and more entrepreneurs are recognizing the idea that you build your audience for whatever reason it is, and then if you're able to sell that audience for some other reason or with some other offer. That's how you can truly build. So the greatest commodity right now is influence, personal or leveraged. And we talked about the value of entertainment, and I think that for too long people have kind of poo-pooed the idea that you need to be entertaining, or it's somehow a little demeaning to be an entertainer. But if you look at business throughout the years, there've been very, very few just purely serious people who have succeeded, and you'll find that just across, especially now as we get more and more exposure. It used to be maybe more possible back in the day when you could say, I don't want to be known, and you could refuse an interview. It's more and more about people recognizing people, liking people, and having being able to communicate. I mean, I think if you think about the kind of success that Simon Sinek, for instance, has had right in this recent time, I don't think he would have ever gotten close to anywhere that kind of success pre-internet, pre-social media. It just it's not enough. His book wouldn't have been heavy enough or academic enough to pass the rigor to go like, oh, this is absolutely a must read for business. But because of the exposure, because of the personality, because of his ability to, I mean that too, right?
And Brene Brown too, right? No, that was the starting point for Brene Brown and Simon Sinek. A TED Talk.
Yeah. So it's a lot about that. So I mean, that's just the thing that I would like to put out there, because there are people in academics, people who have very serious jobs and have serious messages and information to share, that just want the work to speak for itself. And the question I always ask them in return is, well, who speaks for the work?
Yeah. And we need the academics speaking up. As a former academic. All right, so the final thing we're going to keep in, because people have told me that they really like it. What is keeping you distracted at the moment? I've got a good one. I hope you guys haven't watched it yet. Who wants to go first?
No.
Well, where I've been going recently, which is quite interesting, is actually on YouTube watching military reports, just to hear the military nerds go at it. I watched an Austrian general do an update. Well, I think he was. I don't know whether he was, but he could be just some guy with an Austrian accent and the right kind of lighting. But they did a report, and they do a daily report on the Ukraine war.
That would have been a good week for it.
Yeah, but that was quite interesting. So I found that because I was actually following the thing that was really distracting me, which was the big success that that Ukraine had recently with the drone attacks. And of course, Ukraine has changed the game and changed the meaning of drone, because drones used to be about these smaller size. Essentially, they used to be planes, somewhat smaller in size, delivering payloads from far away and being controlled from thousands of miles away. And Ukraine has really changed it to mean much more warfare by the drone that you probably have seen, for sale at the hobby shop. The last attack that they pulled off, and if you haven't gone to look at it as well, is basically using drones that were essentially about $300 a piece, and using, of course, lots and lots of strategy and tactics around it. They were able to cause billions of dollars of damage, and more importantly, actually, really stop the Russians' ability to launch missile attacks from the air. I mean, quite a bit. They didn't stop them, but they reduced the capacity by something like
40%,
30%.
40%,
big number. Yeah. So I've been taken by how well that was done, the kind of plan that they launched, and it was actually what I liked about it was really how, if you looked at it and you heard a kid explain how he would do it, a kid might say the same thing. And it was that kind of a plan. It was just
did you
a
hear
kid's
that
plan rolled out with expert, execution.
Did you hear the story that it was designed by a DJ whose girlfriend writes erotic novels, So to me, it even made it an even more interesting story. It was just, yeah. And then the impact, psychological impact on Russia, and there's trucks backed up everywhere.
I think these things are put out there to try and discredit in some sense, when there's no reason why a DJ can't do other things.
Oh, it wasn't being discredited. It was.
And what the girlfriend is kind of like, how is that relevant?
No, I love that story out of Ukraine. The young people who are sort of creative and technological, and that's been a big part of the story of the war. And drone warfare is forever changed, and that was led by Ukraine for sure.
Yeah,
I love the idea that the DJ was behind that, and just I fantasize momentarily what happens is just before the bombs went off, they heard.
Well, it's like Apocalypse Now, the film.
Yeah.
No, it's firing away as you go on through.
All right, Richard? What's distracting you?
Probably similarly for me. Yes, definitely Ukraine. Because of the spectacular success.
Not news. He just happened to mention news, but yeah.
Yeah, but it is what's distracting me at the moment, because we're coming into crop season, and Ukraine, as we know, is basically it's feeding a large part of Europe, and it's certainly feeding the whole of North Africa.
Yeah.
And I think, you are now in the third year of the war. Really, to me, this is the real bomb that's going to come off, and it's distracting me a lot, is what happens to the very complex situation with migrants coming. Because if you cannot eat, you're going to come. And you look at Greece and Italy and lesser extent Spain, the amount of people that are going to leave Africa here because they see no hope and no future is just staggering. And I think it could become a real trigger for me, what's happening with the summer crops in Ukraine, Belarus, and Poland, because that's what feeds the continent, essentially.
And Ukraine's been put on the list of impacted by drought as well, the southern part of it. So that's a big one. All right, David, what's distracting you?
First is that the drought, the forecast out a couple of days ago on Ukraine harvest on wheat is just down on like 10% because of the drought, not the war.
Yeah.
That's ignoring the fact that there will be other disruptions.
Yeah.
Not accounting for those first. And 10% is a lot, because we as I mentioned before, the world China is also having a problem with its wheat production at the moment.
Yeah.
So that compounds onto it, and the world has basically like a 3-4 month stock to the flow.
Yeah.
So 10% eats significantly into that.
Yes.
So what's distracting me is companion planting. So this is the idea that you plant different things which allow them to grow together. And so I've been thinking, how do you plant a garden so that actually it's really nice garden and it's also a robust food system? So how do you complement those together? And the thing about the companion planting I'm thinking about is, how do you companion plant a solar panel?
Okay.
So we think of it, you have to point it all to the sun and stuff. And then it occurred to me that actually, it gets really warm. So can I grow grapes next to it and benefit from that warmth that it has, and get it from protection, because it shelters it a bit? And then the rain falls on it. What kind of guttering system do I want? And I want a natural pond, and that needs some kind of pumping of airflow and things. If I've got the energy system from there, I've got this. And the energy system about this is that, so I'm now starting to think, okay, what kind of plants can I actually plant next to my solar panel, which I don't have, but I'm thinking of it.
Right.
And not put it on the roof, but use it as a way to actually develop a natural, robust food system where the energy is possible. And I'm talking with an engineer, an agricultural engineer, that Christoph, that you might have spoken to him about. He's a young, keen engineer, to think, how can that actually automate the food system.
Hmm.
So that a small garden, maybe like 50 feet or whatever, can become that, and you can actually have it do all the things without you having to do that. So you only do the things that you want as you go along through.
Yeah.
So it's a different way of thinking about taking companion planting to technology and nature.
Well, I'm expecting little video stories along the way as you work this out, because it's the engineer and the physicist together, right?
Yes, and nature. And
nature, exactly.
We're learning from nature.
All right. So my distraction, I watched Mountain Head. Have you guys heard about Mountain Head?
No, it's a first.
Yeah,
That's
so
the new Stephen Carell film. Is that the one?
Yes. So he's
okay. Haven't seen it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's weird. So it's like 4 tech gurus. Like, one hasn't made his first billion, but the richest person in the world, the wise elder, and the young buck that's got the AI technology that really is going to change the world. And it's the 4 of them in a house for a couple of days. It's incredibly uncomfortable. It's so spot on. I've spent a lot of time with people of that level in the technology industry over my career. Not in the last sort of 10 or so years. I haven't been in those rooms, but in the good old days, the Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer, those sort of days, Michael Dell, Larry Ellison. It's a really interesting group of people to be around.
I want to be around them.
The way they speak, the way they communicate, the distance from humanity is very obvious to me. It's not obvious to everybody else in the room. So Steve's saying Mountain Head's totally bonkers, as well as so cringy. It really is. It's an uncomfortable watch, but I think it's an important watch, especially look at what we're going on around the world right now. I can't remember where we watched it, but it says somewhere. HBO Max, I think. So there we go. Our first shit show.
Wow. Yes. Polycrisis untangled.
So we've gone over time, so we better say goodbye. Thank you to everyone for joining us. Thanks for commenting, Steve, Nico. Who else have we got here? Sammy. Come and join us. We're going to be here every Friday. We've got a great guest next week who I'll share more about as we get towards towards next Friday, I suppose.
Yeah.
Anyway, we will say goodbye for now. All right.
Indeed.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Bye.